Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I thought I'd found peace, a quiet home, no rules, no nosy neighbors. Then came the notes, the fines, the shadowy surveillance, all from an HOA I didn't even belong to. At the center, one woman in a cardigan with a clipboard, and a vendetta. This isn't a story, it's suburban warfare. I never thought the biggest threat to my peace and quiet would come wrapped in a cardigan and HOA bylaws. When I bought my house on the edge of Beacon Hill Farms, the one detail that sealed the deal wasn't the remodeled kitchen, the oversized garage, or the mature oaks along the back fence. It was the legal confirmation that this property wasn't part of the HOA. I checked it 3 times with my lawyer. The parcel had been originally zoned separately, technically excluded from the community covenants, and the original developer never filed the annexation paperwork. In plain English, I was free. The house sat at the farthest end of the neighborhood cul-de-sac, with no neighboring property behind it, just a slope down to a dry creek and a wall of trees. I'd spent the first 2 weeks after move-in putting up a new cedar fence, installing floodlights and cameras, and rebuilding the back deck. I didn't talk to the neighbors much, and that wasn't an accident. I worked remotely, liked my space, and enjoyed drinking my morning coffee without anyone policing the height of my grass. That was supposed to be the point. So when I stepped outside one Tuesday morning and found a folded piece of paper tucked under my welcome mat, my stomach dropped. No envelope, just laser-printed words, all caps, bolded. All homes within Beacon Hill Farm perimeters must register with the HOA by the end of this month. Failure to comply will result in administrative escalation. No signature, no date, just menace. I read it twice, then marched back inside, pulled out the manila folder with my closing documents, and flipped straight to the legal survey. There it was in black and white, my lot number floating outside the HOA boundaries like an island. I figured maybe someone dropped this off by mistake. Still, I wasn't thrilled. A few days later, the mail brought something far less ambiguous. A formal-looking envelope stamped with the HOA's letterhead. Inside were 2 sheets. The first was a notice of violation listing a $150 fine for unapproved fence design and a $50 fine for parking on private landscape area. The second sheet included grainy black and white photos of my car, perfectly parked on my own gravel extension, and a zoomed-in shot of my cedar fence post. It was laughable. I didn't waste time. I scanned my plat map, deed, and county parcel verification and attached them to a letter I mailed back the next day, addressed to the Beacon Hill Farms HOA board. In plain, direct language, I wrote, "This property is not and has never been part of the Beacon Hill Farms HOA. I do not recognize any jurisdiction, fines, or regulations applied to this parcel. Cease further correspondence immediately." I felt good about it, but I also knew enough about people, especially HOA people, to understand they don't like being told no. That Sunday, while I was replacing a damaged board on the deck, a silver SUV with a Beacon Hill Farms decal parked across the street. A man in a blue vest stepped out, clipboard in hand, and took pictures of my house from the sidewalk. He didn't walk onto my property, but he loitered long enough to make it clear that this wasn't curiosity, it was surveillance. The next day, 2 different men wearing similar vests stood across the street near my mailbox. One was pointing toward my backyard. The other held a DSLR camera and snapped several pictures. I leaned against the porch rail and just stared at them until they left. No greeting, no wave. I went inside and checked the footage from my cameras, just to be sure I wasn't imagining things. It was all there. Timestamps, faces, behavior. I exported the files and dropped them into a folder labeled HOA just in case. 2 days later, I came home from the hardware store to find my front gate propped open and a laminated friendly reminder from the HOA tucked under a landscaping rock near my steps. It said I had 7 days to submit an application for compliance review and offered a community discount on fence repainting services. The logo was the same, but the paper wasn't signed. Just, the board. I walked over to my neighbor's house, an older guy named Mitch who'd waved at me once or twice, and asked him point blank, "Do you know who's putting these on my property?" He looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. "Probably Karen." "Karen?" He nodded slowly. "Karen Lynch, HOA president. She thinks every house in this ZIP code should be under her rulebook. Don't worry about it. She's just..." He searched for a word. Persistent. The next day, The same silver SUV drove slowly past my house twice in the span of 15 minutes. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. I just made sure the battery backups on my cameras were working. By that weekend, it was clear this wasn't going away. A new letter arrived, hand-delivered this time. Final warning, it said. Failure to register will result in property lien assessment and further community measures. That night, I wrote up a cease and desist draft and emailed it to my lawyer. This wasn't just a neighborly misunderstanding anymore. This was war. If there's one thing you learn quickly when dealing with a control freak, it's this. Silence from them doesn't mean peace. It means planning. After I sent the cease and desist letter through my attorney, things went quiet for 4 days. No more flyers, no HOA patrols parked across the street, no random mailings. I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen had backed off. I was wrong. It started with the knock. 7 a.m. sharp on a Wednesday while I was halfway through my first coffee. It wasn't polite. It was the kind of knock someone uses when they think they have authority. I opened the door and found a man I didn't recognize. Tall, mid-40s, wearing a Beacon Hill Farms vest and holding a smartphone up like a badge. "Sir," he said, no greeting. "We've received reports of aggressive behavior from this address. You've been flagged for review." I blinked. Aggressive behavior? We've had multiple complaints from residents. You've been seen loitering near mailboxes, making people uncomfortable, and failing to respond to HOA directives. You mean my own mailbox? On my own property? He didn't flinch. I'm not here to debate. I'm documenting that you've been informed. HOA security will be increasing monitoring of this address for the safety of the community. I didn't even respond. I just shut the door in his face. That evening, my neighbor Mitch texted me a picture of a flyer taped up at the community bulletin board by the park. It had a blurry image of my backyard and a bold headline, "Uncooperative resident threatens neighborhood harmony." It listed my address and claimed I'd been hostile to volunteers and refused multiple friendly resolutions. It even suggested that I may pose a threat to community safety. No name on the flyer, of course, just the HOA seal and a vague signature line, "The Board." By the next morning, I noticed the change. Where neighbors once waved or nodded as they passed, they now crossed the street. One woman with a stroller turned around entirely when I came outside. My inbox was hit with spam complaints from local service providers, plumbers, roofers, canceling appointments I never made. One landscaper showed up unannounced and asked if I was the guy refusing HOA lawn compliance. I told him I mow my own damn yard and shut the gate behind him. That weekend, someone hung a laminated sign on my side fence. "Private property under review, do not enter," with a Beacon Hill Farms logo. It was gone by morning, but my cameras had already caught the culprit, a man in a baseball cap, HOA vest half-zipped, glancing around nervously before slapping it up and jogging off. I emailed the footage to my lawyer. His reply was short. "They're escalating. Log everything. We're building a case." So I did. Every car that parked too long in front of my driveway, every HOA visitor caught near my property line, every time a sign was moved or mail tampered with, or one of my security lights mysteriously disabled. I even added a fourth camera, infrared-capable, wide-angle, overlooking the side yard that bordered Karen Lynch's house. And that's when I caught her. It was 12:35 a.m. on a Thursday night. I was reviewing recordings because one of the new floodlights had triggered unexpectedly. On the playback, I saw her, Karen. Standing behind the fence, her phone held up, slowly scanning my house. She wasn't taking photos. She was recording video of my windows, my deck, even my doghouse. She stayed there for nearly 2 full minutes, unmoving, silent. Then she turned and vanished into the dark. I exported the file immediately and sent it to my attorney with the subject line, "We're past the point of civil letters." The next morning, I posted new signs. "Private property, under video surveillance. Violators will be prosecuted." I printed them on weatherproof aluminum, bolted them to the fence posts, and added a QR code that linked to a publicly accessible live camera feed pointed directly at the gate. I wasn't just protecting my land anymore. I was building a record. The final straw came the following Sunday when someone tossed a small firecracker into my backyard around 10 p.m. My dog nearly tore through the screen door trying to escape. Luckily, no fire, just torn up grass and a terrified German shepherd. The cameras didn't catch the hand that threw it, but they caught the silhouette on the opposite side of the fence. It matched the shape and height of a certain HOA president. I didn't sleep that night. I was done playing passive defense. Monday morning, I sat down at my desk, compiled every file, every photo, every letter, every time-stamped video, and forwarded the full batch to my lawyer with a simple instruction: file the damn lawsuit. Filing the lawsuit wasn't a bluff. It was a scalpel, and I was ready to cut deep. My lawyer, Greg Alston, didn't waste time. By Tuesday, the paperwork was drafted and filed in county court. The complaint outlined a pattern of harassment, false representation of jurisdiction, invasion of privacy, and willful emotional distress. We requested 3 things: a court-confirmed restraining order against Karen Lynch specifically, an injunction to block any further HOA interference with my property, and $18,000 in damages. Greg called it modest. I called it controlled fury. The moment that lawsuit became public record, the silence shattered like glass. At 6:42 a.m. the next day, someone rang my doorbell. I checked the camera feed. Karen, of course. I didn't answer. I had no intention of speaking to her without a courtroom between us, but I watched from the hallway as she stood there for nearly 4 full minutes, occasionally gesturing at the door like she was delivering a sermon. Then, with the dramatic flair of a community theater villain, she pulled a piece of paper from her purse, waved it at my security camera, and dropped it at the doorstep. Later, I picked it up with gloves. It wasn't a response from her lawyer. It was handwritten, in cursive, no less. You've declared war on your neighbors. We only asked you to follow the rules. You've made yourself the enemy. KAL, the next 48 hours were a circus. I received 2 separate envelopes from the HOA addressed to the resident at my address, both reiterating my failure to comply with mandatory community standards. One included a laughable offer of mediation where I could voluntarily submit to an HOA compliance review in exchange for having past fines forgiven. It might have been hilarious if it hadn't come with a page stapled to the back, again showing photos of my yard, fence, and now my back porch. That one set me off. I called Greg. Tell the court we want an emergency hearing. The judge granted it. The hearing took place the following Monday. Karen showed up in a pale pink suit, flanked by a man she introduced as her legal representative, a guy named Ronald Dax, who I later found out wasn't even a licensed attorney in Texas, just a consultant for community organizations. Greg smirked when he handed over the credential challenge form. Ronald was asked to sit in the back. Karen argued that my property, while technically not recorded within the HOA's jurisdiction, functionally lived within the aesthetic and communal parameters of Beacon Hill Farms, and that my presence without oversight was destabilizing the shared environment. Yes, that's what she said, out loud, in front of a judge. Greg calmly and with brutal efficiency presented the property plat map, title deed, county exemption filings, video of the firecracker incident, photos of Karen at the back fence after midnight, and printouts of the anonymous flyers distributed, with my address and defamatory claims. By the time he was done, Karen had stopped looking at the judge and started staring at her handbag like it held an escape hatch. The judge ruled swiftly. The restraining order was granted. Karen Lynch was to stay no less than 300 feet from my property line. HOA representatives were barred from initiating any further contact, surveillance, or enforcement action regarding my home. The court also awarded $18,000 in damages for emotional distress, false fines, and invasion of privacy. Karen tried to object, tried to claim I had provoked her with the lawsuit, but the judge shut her down so hard it echoed. It should have been the end. As I walked out of that courtroom, Greg nudged me and said, "You did everything right. Now we wait for them to fold." I wanted to believe him. But when I got home, I noticed something new. A single red line of spray paint across my curb, stretching just past my driveway. No words, just a line. A message. I checked the cameras. The footage was blurry, nothing definitive. But I didn't need confirmation. The court had drawn a boundary, and Karen was about to lose her mind over it. 3 days. That's how long the thin veil of self-control lasted. After the court ruling, I tried to settle back into a sense of normalcy. I got back to work. I spent a full day restaining the deck, replacing the damage from the winter rains. I took long walks with my dog and avoided the front yard, but deep down, I knew it was borrowed peace. Karen wasn't the kind of person who lost quietly. For people like her, a restraining order wasn't a boundary. It was an insult, A red flag waved in front of a deranged suburban bull. It started early Saturday morning. I was up before sunrise, checking the weather report on my phone and sipping coffee on the back deck. The yard was still, blue-gray in the early light. Then I heard it, the unmistakable metallic clink of a latch opening. I froze. The side gate was chained and padlocked. The back fence had been reinforced. There was no legitimate reason for that sound. Then the floodlight near the rear corner clicked on. I stood up, stepped back into the kitchen, and pulled up the live camera feed. What I saw made my heart lurch, but not from fear, from rage. Karen Lynch, in sneakers, sweatpants, and a zip-up hoodie. She had a bolt cutter slung under one arm and a garden claw in the other hand. She was inside my backyard, inside the fence. Inside the perimeter, she was legally banned from crossing. And she wasn't hesitating. She went straight for the decorative solar lights lining the walkway. Smash. One kick, smash, another. She tore them out like weeds and threw them into the hedges. I moved fast. I started recording the feed directly to the cloud, dialed 911 and told them I had a court-protected trespasser actively destroying my property. The dispatcher said officers were en route and asked if I was in immediate danger. No, I said, but she's about to be. I stepped onto the back deck as Karen turned her attention to my grill. Stainless steel, 4-burner propane, something I'd built by hand with my dad years ago. She flipped the lid open and slammed it shut hard enough to crack the thermometer gauge. Then she shoved the whole unit off the patio edge, sending it clattering into the flagstones below. She roared something unintelligible as she did it, pacing like a wild animal. My dog barked from the kitchen, ears pinned back, but I kept him inside. She wasn't done. She stormed into the garden bed, ripped out a shrub I'd planted the week prior, and hurled it across the lawn. Then she turned, grabbed one of the lounge chairs from the deck, and heaved it at the side window. The frame cracked, but the glass didn't shatter. Still, the sound echoed through the yard like a gunshot. And then, of course, she saw the flag. I keep an American flag mounted on a small pole near the back steps. It's not huge, but I fly it clean, every day, properly lit and folded at night. Karen locked eyes on it like it was personal. She charged the pole, grabbed the bottom edge of the flag, and screamed, literally screamed, "This is my neighborhood. You don't deserve this house." She tried to tear it down. It wouldn't give. I walked out onto the deck, phone in hand, camera on. "Karen," I said calmly, "you're on camera live and the police are on their way. I strongly recommend you sit down." She spun to face me, panting, face red, hair wild. Her hands were scratched and dirty. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "You think you won?" she spat. "You think a piece of paper means anything? I built this neighborhood. I made these people care. And you? You just trespassed on everything we stand for." "You've lost your mind," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "And you've violated a court order. That's jail time, Karen." She laughed. Actually laughed. "You think I care? You think I'm afraid of you?" She took a step toward the deck stairs, but then the sirens cut through the air. 2 police cruisers turned onto the cul-de-sac, tires screeching lightly as they pulled to the curb. Karen froze. Her bravado drained instantly. I watched her make a split-second decision, turn and bolt through the opposite side of the yard, tripping over a half-ripped solar stake as she went. She made it as far as Mitch's backyard before the first officer tackled her flat into the grass. I stood at the railing, watching them cuff her on the spot. When they walked her back toward the cruiser, one of the officers stopped by my gate. "You got footage?" I nodded. "Everything's already saved and backed up. I'll send it to the detective directly." Karen didn't say another word. She sat in the back of the car with her head down, breathing hard, hands cuffed in front of her. Not a single neighbor came out to defend her. A few peeked from behind curtains. One man stood at his door with a coffee cup and shook his head slowly. The officer confirmed the charges on site: criminal trespassing, vandalism, contempt of court, and destruction of private property. They even found the bolt cutters and gloves still in her hoodie pockets. As they drove away, I looked at the cracked grill, the snapped flag holder, the mangled flower beds, the broken solar lights, and I felt something close to peace, because this time it wasn't just her word against mine. This time she crossed the line, and the law was on my side. The arrest made headlines in the local Facebook group before the sun had even set. Someone had filmed Karen being loaded into the back of the cruiser from across the street. Shaky vertical video, grainy but unmistakable. The post read, "What the hell happened to Karen?" And within hours, over 100 comments flooded in. Half were shocked, a quarter were gleeful, and a few, the usual loyalists, insisted I must have set her up. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. By Sunday, the charges were public. The county listed 4: criminal trespassing, destruction of private property, contempt of a court-issued restraining order, and a bonus count, disorderly conduct with intent to intimidate. Apparently screaming, "You don't deserve this house," while ripping an American flag off a pole in someone's backyard tends to catch a prosecutor's attention. The arraignment was Monday morning. I didn't attend, but Greg did. He texted me from the courthouse. She pled not guilty. Wants to explain herself. This'll be fun. I got my own visit that afternoon from the responding officer, Detective Clara Redmond. She showed up in plain clothes, polite but direct. "Mind if I ask a few follow-ups?" she said as I let her in. She walked the backyard, documenting the broken grill, the smashed lighting, the window crack, the garden damage. She measured the flagpole height, checked where the bolt cutters had severed the gate chain, even noted the scuff marks Karen's sneakers had left in the mulch. "She was in here less than 6 minutes total," I told her. Redmond nodded, impressed. "You timed it?" "I watched it live while I was on the phone with dispatch. I keep logs." "You'd be surprised how often that doesn't happen," she said. "Judges love documentation. Keep doing what you're doing." After she left, I started calculating the cost of repairs. Replacement grill, around $1,200. Solar lighting, maybe $250. Garden plants, chair cushions, window repair, new flag hardware. Altogether, just under $4,000, not counting emotional labor. I sent the breakdown to Greg, who smiled when I said I kept all receipts. "Then let's make it count," he said. "We'll update the damages portion of the claim and push for restitution as part of sentencing." Karen's lawyer, a real one this time, filed a motion requesting supervised release while they awaited trial. Greg filed an opposition with copies of my footage, photos, and a list of prior HOA complaints logged against her name over the past 5 years. We added 3 neighbor statements as affidavits. People who had once defended Karen now wanted distance. One of them wrote, "She's no longer the person we thought we elected." The judge reviewed everything and ruled partially in our favor. Karen was released, but with conditions: GPS ankle monitor, court-mandated psychological evaluation, and 0 contact with me or anyone residing at my address, direct or indirect. That included no proxies, no mail, no social media mentions, nothing. The violation meant immediate remand. Despite this, she still found ways to twist the knife. The day after her release, I found a professionally printed pamphlet tucked into the newspaper box near my gate. It wasn't addressed directly, but it had a clear message. On the front, "When the courts fail the community." Inside, a screed about neighbors weaponizing the law, malicious homeowners, and how Beacon Hill Farms deserves protection from outsiders. There were no names, no addresses, but she quoted the dollar amount the court awarded me, $18,000, and described unauthorized fencing and deliberately defiant landscaping choices. Greg sent a cease and desist letter to her attorney. Again. This time, citing violation of indirect contact provisions. The next morning, HOA's internal communication server, supposedly private, leaked. A disgruntled board member sent screenshots to a local real estate blog. One of the posts, allegedly from Karen before her arrest, read, "He thinks he's safe because of one judge's signature. Let's see how he handles a little pressure." Another, more recent, "We'll rebuild Beacon Hill without him, maybe even around him." That leak triggered a chain reaction. Residents began to question the board's leadership. At the next HOA meeting, several members demanded an audit of finances, citing the thousands spent on legal consultation during Karen's reign. Others asked how a president facing criminal charges still held the title. When someone suggested a recall vote, the room reportedly erupted into applause. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from Mitch the next day. "They're eating each other alive," he said, sipping a beer on my back deck. "You lit the match, man." Now they're standing in gasoline. Meanwhile, the trial date was set, 6 weeks from the arrest. County level, open to the public. Greg warned me, she'll try something. Either a plea deal with spin control or a full performance in court. Brace for spectacle. I did more than that. I reinforced the side gate with a steel latch, upgraded the perimeter lighting, recalibrated the camera system to flag specific facial recognition, replaced the busted flagpole with a thicker one mounted on concrete, and I added a new camera directly above the gate with a sign beneath it that read, 300 feet means 300 feet. I wasn't afraid of Karen anymore. I was preparing for her next mistake. The weeks leading up to the trial blurred together in a haze of preparations, depositions, and carefully calculated silence. Karen had vanished from public view, likely under orders from her attorney, but her influence still lingered like a bad smell. The neighborhood remained tense. Half of Beacon Hill Farm seemed to be waiting for the storm to pass. The other half didn't realize the tornado was already on its way. Then came the subpoena. Greg called me one afternoon while I was trimming back hedges. "You're not going to like this," he said, already sounding exasperated. "They've subpoenaed Mitch and your landscaper. Looks like Karen's building a defense strategy around pattern of provocation." "Let me guess," I replied. "She's going to claim I escalated everything?" "Bingo. She'll try to reframe you as a provocateur who targeted her leadership, undermined the HOA, and created hostility to trigger her outburst." I didn't laugh. I wanted to, but this was exactly the type of deflection I'd expected. Karen wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to rewrite history. Greg assured me we had it under control. Mitch's testimony would actually help us. He'd already submitted a sworn statement and wasn't afraid of cross-examination. The landscaper. A quiet guy named Elias, who just wanted to mow lawns and avoid lawsuits. He had videos of Karen confronting him on my property weeks before her arrest, demanding he stop working on my fence. His footage even included her saying, "This isn't even his house anymore. He just doesn't know it yet." We uploaded that to the digital case file. As court day approached, media interest ticked up. A local paper ran a story. HOA president faces charges after backyard breakdown. They published a photo of Karen from her arrest, unflattering and flushed, alongside a pristine shot of my backyard flagpole under the headline. It painted a pretty clear picture. Greg smiled when he saw it. Juries read newspapers too. The morning of the trial arrived cloudless and quiet. I wore a charcoal gray suit, conservative tie, no flair. Karen arrived an hour later in a pristine cream-colored jacket dress, her hair pinned, makeup flawless. She looked like a real estate agent running for mayor, but her eyes told another story. Tight, tired, and darting. Her lawyer trailed behind her, shuffling notes like a gambler down to his last chip. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I expected, literally and metaphorically. The judge, same one from the restraining order hearing, didn't waste time with pleasantries. The prosecution led with the video. All of it. From the moment Karen hopped my fence to when she was tackled in Mitch's backyard. Every frame was shown to the jury. I watched as they leaned forward when she kicked the grill. One woman gasped when she tore down the flag. Her defense tried to spin, claimed she was in a state of heightened psychological stress brought on by cumulative harassment, claimed that I had deliberately antagonized HOA leadership and provoked conflict as a means to discredit and destabilize community leadership, claimed that I had instigated the chain of events by refusing reasonable compliance efforts. Greg stood and dismantled all of it. He brought up the property maps again, replayed Karen's own words, presented the social media leaks, showed texts she sent to another board member stating, "He's lucky we haven't burned that fence down yet." He even played the footage from Elias's phone, zoomed in so the jury could read her lips. The final blow came from a surprise witness. One of the HOA board members, a woman named Clara Reyes, had resigned just days before the trial. On the stand, she testified that Karen had, on multiple occasions, bragged about dealing with the outsider and had once said, "A few false finds will make him leave faster." When asked why she hadn't come forward sooner, she said, "Because I was afraid." "But I'm not anymore. People need to know who they trusted." Karen's lawyer tried to object. The judge overruled him. The verdict was fast. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom remained silent as the clerk read each charge. Criminal trespassing, vandalism, contempt of court, and disorderly conduct with intimidation. The judge immediately revoked her bail and ordered Karen remanded to custody pending sentencing. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. But her face collapsed in on itself like wet plaster. Her lawyer didn't even try to console her. As the bailiff led her out, she glanced at me. Just once. No rage, no threats, just a hollow, bitter vacuum. That look, more than any verdict, was when I knew it was over. The sentencing hearing was scheduled 2 weeks after the verdict, and for once, Karen didn't try to delay it. Maybe her legal team advised against it, or maybe she finally realized the walls weren't just closing in, they were already sealed. Greg told me not to expect much drama in court. Sentencing hearings are often more predictable than trials, he said. But with Karen, who knows? We were both wrong. That morning, I arrived early and found a seat near the back. Karen entered in cuffs, flanked by 2 deputies. Gone was the real estate queen outfit. She wore a standard beige, jail-issued jumpsuit, hair unwashed, eyes puffy. She didn't look around the courtroom. She didn't acknowledge the few supporters who dared show up, sitting stiffly 3 rows behind me like embarrassed PTA parents. The judge entered. After reviewing Karen's pre-sentencing report, which included psychiatric evaluations, character references, and victim impact statements, the court opened the floor for final statements. Karen stood, and then she spoke. Not an apology, not remorse, no humility. I was doing what I believed was right, she began, voice trembling not with sorrow, but conviction. For the integrity of our community, for our property values, for order. The judge blinked slowly, already unimpressed. I admit I lost control that morning, she continued. But that man, she pointed straight at me, provoked it. He made a mockery of our HOA, flaunted his freedom, disrespected our shared values. Her lawyer gently tugged her sleeve. She pulled away. I am not a criminal, she snapped. I am a community leader. The judge sighed audibly and turned to the prosecution. Greg stood calmly. Your Honor, the footage speaks for itself. So do the restraining order violations. So do the witness statements. But more than that, Ms. Lynch's refusal to acknowledge responsibility, even now, highlights the risk she poses to others. He looked at Karen. This was not a momentary lapse. This was a pattern, a mindset. She treated a private citizen like property. That's what this is about. The judge nodded. Then he read the sentence aloud, each word echoing louder than the last. 30 days in Travis County Jail, to be served immediately. 14 months of supervised probation. $22,000 in restitution to the victim. Mandatory completion of a psychiatric rehabilitation program. And a permanent injunction banning her from holding any leadership or board position in any HOA within the state of Texas. Karen's mouth dropped open. She whispered something to her attorney, something I couldn't hear, but the look on his face told me it wasn't good. He didn't respond. He just gathered his papers and sat down as 2 deputies escorted Karen from the courtroom. She didn't turn to look at anyone, not even once. Outside, local reporters were already gathering. The courthouse had released the official statement. The footage of Karen tearing through my backyard was already trending in HOA reform circles. A few journalists tried to get a comment from me. I declined. That night, the neighborhood felt different, not just quieter, lighter. Mitch stopped by, holding a 6-pack and wearing the biggest grin I'd seen all year. To freedom, he said, cracking open a can. But the biggest shock came 2 days later. The County Ethics Board announced a formal investigation into Beacon Hill Farms HOA. Thanks to the testimony provided during the trial and Rhea's cooperation, they uncovered signs of financial mismanagement, unauthorized dues collections, and falsified records. The board was suspended pending a full audit. Greg called it an unexpected cherry on top. I called it closure. That week, signs started appearing around the neighborhood, homemade ones, handwritten in Sharpie. The one that made me laugh the hardest was taped to a stop sign near the entrance. Stop, thinking you're above the law. By the end of the month, Karen's home was listed for sale. The photos made it look warm and bright, like nothing bad had ever happened there. A lie, of course, but that was her specialty. She moved out quietly. No goodbye, no tantrum, just silence. And that was louder than any threat she'd ever made. Spring came early to Texas that year, but I didn't really notice it until I finally stood on my deck one quiet morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun spill over my backyard like nothing had ever happened. Except everything had. Karen was gone. Officially, her house had sold to a young couple with 2 dogs and a tendency to wave every time they passed my fence. They'd asked if the cameras were still active and thanked me for keeping the block sane. I told them I kept the cameras rolling, just in case Texas decides to do a sequel. The new HOA board, well, what was left of it, had been replaced by a temporary oversight committee from the county. A few members tried to avoid being seen altogether. Others emailed private apologies. I deleted them unread. Greg sent me a final case summary and a bottle of scotch with a note. Next time, pick a neighborhood with less personality. I finally took down the temporary floodlights I'd installed in the backyard. Not because I didn't need them, but because I no longer felt watched. The paranoia had lifted. What had started with a printed sheet on my porch ended with a court order, a ruined presidency, and an entire HOA under investigation. But there was still one thing I needed to do. That Saturday, with the help of Mitch and Elias, I installed a new aluminum sign along the inside of my back fence. It faced inward, toward the house, not the street. I didn't need to send messages anymore. I needed to remember. The plaque was clean, brushed steel, and read in block letters. No trespassing, no compliance, no forgiveness. Later that evening, a few of the neighbors, ones who'd stayed silent during the worst of it, gathered on Mitch's lawn. I was invited surprisingly. Maybe they wanted closure, or maybe guilt had finally softened their pride. I went because I was curious. They didn't know how to start the conversation, so I started it for them. "I'm not joining the HOA," I said flatly, sipping a soda. "And if any of you start acting like her again, I will sue faster than a snake on hot asphalt." Someone laughed. The tension broke. We talked about dogs and fences and the absurdity of suburban politics. Someone brought cookies. Someone else grilled burgers. The air felt different, warmer, real. But as I left, one neighbor, a woman named Sarah, who had never spoken to me until now, caught up and said, "You were right, you know. She thought she owned us." "You proved she didn't." I nodded, but I didn't smile. I wasn't interested in being a hero. I just wanted to be left alone. A week later, a county truck pulled up to the community entrance. The workers removed the old Beacon Hill Farms HOA sign. The metal groaned as they pried it from the ground. They didn't replace it, just drove off. No one complained. A few days after that, I stood again on my porch, watching the sky turn orange behind the trees, and realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. No footsteps crunching gravel at midnight. No cameras being ripped down. No insane woman tearing through my hedges with a garden claw. Just me, my home, and the silence of freedom. It was finally over.